We view nature through a filter of fairy tales, forgetting the food chain never rests. Today we analyze 6 fatal cases where humans tried to pet apex predators. This is an educational breakdown of human error. Never cross safety barriers to interact with wild animals. Nature has no empathy, and crossing the line between observer and prey always ends in clinical reality. On July 5, 1999, the massive aquatic complex of SeaWorld Orlando was completely locked down for the night. The cheerful daytime music was long gone. It was replaced by the low, heavy vibration of industrial water pumps. The sharp chemical smell of artificial chlorine mixed with the warm Florida breeze. Deep inside the concrete maze of the park, a massive holding pool sat in total darkness. The water here was artificially chilled to exactly 50 degrees Fahrenheit. This was done to simulate the harsh, freezing currents of the open ocean. Resting quietly at the bottom of this black tank was Tilikum. He was a 12,000-pound bull orca. He was the absolute undisputed apex predator of this concrete world. Hiding quietly in the shadows of the empty stadium above was 27-year-old Daniel Dukes. He was not a park employee. He was an intruder who had deliberately avoided the nighttime security patrols. He waited for hours in the dark to fulfill a bizarre, deeply personal dream. Daniel was driven by a naive and fatal illusion. He genuinely believed that humans and wild sea creatures shared a deep spiritual bond. He looked down into the dark water and did not see a lethal hunter. He saw a gentle giant. He saw a massive, friendly dolphin that simply wanted to be petted and played with. The established safety rule of this environment relied on total physical separation. Killer whales in captivity are managed strictly from behind thick steel gates and heavily reinforced glass. They are complex biological engines designed for total underwater dominance. In the wild, their hunting method involves brutal kinetic strikes. They grab their prey and force it deep underwater until all physical resistance stops. This commercial tank was absolutely never designed to protect a vulnerable, naked human in the water. Believing in his spiritual connection, Daniel stripped off his clothes in the humid night air. He left his neatly folded garments on the rough concrete deck. He climbed over the short plexiglass safety barrier. He slowly lowered himself into the freezing, dark salt water. The sudden temperature shock hit his central nervous system immediately. His breathing became rapid and shallow. The tiny splashes of his entry sent acoustic vibrations echoing rapidly against the smooth underwater walls. Deep below, the massive animal was instantly awakened. Tilikum's echolocation picked up the fragile, uncoordinated movements at the surface. The total silence of his nighttime enclosure was permanently broken. Daniel floated in the pitch-black water, peering down into the abyss. He likely expected a magical, gentle greeting from his spiritual brother. Time seemed to artificially slow down in the freezing tank. A massive black shadow detached itself from the concrete floor. It moved upward with terrifying, silent speed. The water pressure rapidly displaced around Daniel's bare legs. He had only a fraction of a second to comprehend the immense, terrifying scale of the animal rising toward him. Tilikum breached the surface right beneath the human. The harsh reality of the wild instantly shattered the illusion of a spiritual connection. The massive whale did not offer friendship. To the animal, this sudden intruder was merely a new source of sensory stimulation and a highly interactive toy. The biological reality of the wild took over instantly. Tilikum easily grabbed the fragile human. The immense crushing force of the animal's jaws instantly compromised the soft human tissue. The killer whale violently dragged Daniel beneath the dark, rippling surface. The physical struggle was completely asymmetrical. The human body was repeatedly subjected to severe, blunt force trauma. He was slammed against the unforgiving concrete walls of the holding tank. The continuous forced submersion triggered rapid oxygen depletion in the man's bloodstream. The sheer panic in the freezing water accelerated his metabolic rate. Terminal hypoxia quickly set in as his lungs failed to find air. This severe oxygen deprivation led to an irreversible loss of consciousness. Total cardiac arrest followed moments later. His body simply shut down under the overwhelming physical power of the ocean's top predator. Hours later, the morning sun finally illuminated the park. The early shift of professional animal trainers arrived with heavy silver buckets of fish. They walked out onto the main observation deck to begin their morning routine. The industrial filtration systems continued their steady, emotionless hum. The massive pool was relatively calm. Tilikum was swimming slowly in wide, continuous circles. Draped casually across the broad black back of the killer whale was a lifeless human body. The massive animal was quietly parading his nighttime prize. Paramedics and police officers soon flooded the area. Yellow crime scene tape quickly secured the concrete bleachers. The tragic dream of petting a captive marine giant was entirely over. It stood as a cold, factual reminder that wild instincts operate on strict biological rules. Mother Nature simply does not care about our naive intentions or our desire for a spiritual connection. On April 22, 2008, expensive digital camera equipment sat securely on heavy steel tripods, recording what was supposed to be a highly controlled Hollywood stunt. The dusty outdoor film set at the Predators in Action facility in Southern California operated under a strict illusion of absolute safety. Production assistants quietly adjusted large reflective lighting panels. The dry air smelled strongly of diesel fuel, hot lighting gels, and raw animal meat. Standing confidently in the center of the large dirt enclosure was 39-year-old Stephen Miller. He was a highly experienced professional animal trainer. Stephen was actively preparing to shoot an intense, action-packed promotional video. His designated scene partner was Rocky. Rocky was a towering, 700-pound grizzly bear. This massive animal was not a wild stray. He was a highly profitable, heavily conditioned movie star. The Grizzly had successfully appeared in multiple Hollywood feature films and national television commercials. Stephen's mindset at this moment was deeply rooted in absolute professional confidence. He genuinely believed that his decades of routine behavioral conditioning guaranteed his physical safety. He viewed the enormous brown predator not as a lethal, unpredictable threat. He saw the bear merely as an oversized, furry colleague. He was completely convinced he could safely execute a staged wrestling match. He wanted to playfully grapple with the beast just to get a good action shot for the rolling cameras. The established norm on this movie set was a strict transactional relationship. The bear was trained to hit specific physical marks on the dirt. In exchange for compliance, the animal received sweet treats and large chunks of meat. The bear was heavily conditioned to tolerate extreme human proximity. However, the biological reality is that a grizzly bear is a highly reactive, heavily armed apex predator. Their massive jaw muscles are naturally designed to crush thick bone. They can easily deliver a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch. They absolutely do not possess human reasoning or empathy. Their deadly predatory and defensive instincts are merely suppressed by strict human training. These ancient instincts are never permanently erased. A sudden change in posture, an unfamiliar scent, or a tiny shift in the animal's mood can instantly reactivate their wild programming. The lead camera operator loudly called for action. Stephen stepped confidently right into the predetermined strike zone. The script required aggressive, dynamic movement to look exciting on film. Stephen playfully slapped the massive bear on its heavy side. He actively initiated the fake wrestling sequence. Rocky immediately stood up on his massive hind legs. The bear completely towered over the fragile human, casting a long, dark shadow over the dry dirt. Time seemed to artificially slow down on the busy film set. For 3 long seconds, everything looked perfectly normal. Stephen smiled warmly for the camera lens. He casually grabbed the thick, coarse brown fur on the bear's chest. But in that exact fraction of a second, the animal's internal psychological threshold was crossed. The subtle dynamic of the friendly game instantly shifted. Rocky's small round ears pinned back slightly against his heavy skull. A low, guttural vocalization vibrated deep within the animal's broad chest. Stephen had a microscopic moment of terrifying clarity. He saw the cold, blank, wild stare completely replace the trained focus of the movie star. The human desperately tried to step back, but the physical gap was already closed. What happened next was blindingly fast and brutally efficient. Rocky lunged forward with devastating, totally unpredictable speed. The bear entirely bypassed the staged wrestling routine. Instead, the animal delivered a single, highly calculated defensive strike. The massive jaws clamped directly onto Stefan's right neck and upper shoulder area. The mechanical force of the animal's bite was overwhelming, causing severe localized blunt force trauma. The targeted bite critically compromised the major blood vessels in his neck, and the physical damage was absolutely catastrophic. The human body experienced an instantaneous and massive drop in blood pressure. The brain was immediately deprived of vital oxygen flow. Stefan collapsed heavily into the dusty California dirt. Total circulatory failure occurred within mere moments. Emergency medical interventions and first aid were absolutely futile against such massive mechanical damage to the neck. The veteran trainer suffered rapid and irreversible cardiac arrest right in front of the horrified crew. The sunny Hollywood set immediately dissolved into total chaotic panic. Other desperate handlers frantically deployed chemical pepper spray to back the confused bear away from the victim. The expensive digital cameras kept rolling on their steel tripods. They silently recorded the sudden screaming and the frantic radio calls for an ambulance. Rocky paced nervously behind a sturdy chain-link fence. The massive animal frequently licked its heavy lips. The bear was completely unaware of the legal and moral boundary it had just violently crossed. Yellow crime scene tape soon fluttered in the warm evening breeze. Stefan's dark leather prop jacket lay totally abandoned in the heavily disturbed dirt. The silent camera equipment stood perfectly still around the impact zone. It was a stark, factual reminder that wild instincts cannot be permanently turned off with a script. A lethal predator cannot be safely programmed like a reliable machine, regardless of how many movies it stars in. On November 13, 2011, 40-year-old Army Major and farmer Marius Els was confidently walking down a steep, muddy riverbank. He was going to visit a deeply unnatural and highly dangerous secret kept on his sprawling private farm in the Free State province of South Africa. The vast agricultural lands were baking under the hot afternoon sun, smelling strongly of red dust and the stagnant water of the Vaal River. He was going to visit his favorite resident, Humphrey. Humphrey was a massive, fully grown male hippopotamus. The wild animal weighed over 2,600 pounds of pure muscle and thick hide. Marius suffered from a catastrophic psychological illusion. 5 years earlier, he had rescued the hippo as a small, helpless calf during a severe local flood. He raised it on his property and genuinely believed he had successfully tamed the apex herbivore. He treated the giant beast exactly like a domestic pet dog. He hand-fed the hippo sweet apples and crisp cabbages. He routinely used a standard wooden broom to physically brush its enormous yellow tusks. He even proudly rode on the animal's broad, slippery back for the amusement of his visiting friends. Marius publicly claimed he had a deep, unbreakable emotional bond with the creature. He literally told local reporters that the hippo was his beloved son. The apparent safety of this daily routine was a complete fabrication. In objective biological reality, hippopotamuses are the deadliest large land mammals on the African continent. They are highly aggressive, deeply territorial biological machines. Their massive jaws act like hydraulic presses. They are equipped with sharp ivory tusks that can easily bite a large adult crocodile completely in half. They absolutely do not possess the genetic framework required for human loyalty, empathy, or gratitude. A wild animal of this size simply tolerates a human presence until a hidden, invisible biological boundary is suddenly crossed. Marius ignored all previous warnings from neighboring farmers as he waded confidently into the murky river. The warm water quickly rose up to his waist. He called out to the enormous animal with a warm, familiar tone, expecting a playful greeting. The water displaced heavily as the giant gray mass gracefully glided toward him through the thick green reeds. Time artificially slowed down in the stifling, heavy heat. For a brief, fleeting second, the daily routine seemed perfectly normal. Marius reached out his bare hand to gently pet the hippo's thick, leathery snout. But the exact moment the fragile human stepped deeper into the hippo's natural aquatic domain, a hardwired territorial instinct woke up. The subjective illusion of the friendly pet instantly vanished. The massive jaw opened to its full extent with terrifying, blinding speed. The animal launched a devastating kinetic strike against its supposed owner. The hippo easily clamped its massive jaws directly onto the farmer's torso. The physical struggle between man and beast was totally asymmetrical. The enormous ivory tusks caused an immediate, fatal injury to the human's vital systems. The heavy animal violently dragged Marius deep beneath the dark surface of the river to drown the perceived threat. The process of consequence was extremely fast and strictly physical. The extreme crushing force of the bite structurally compromised the human body, making any physical escape totally impossible. The continuous forced underwater submersion triggered a rapid loss of oxygen in his circulating blood. This severe oxygen starvation quickly shut down his brain function. The victim suffered a rapid and irreversible loss of consciousness in the dark, muddy water. Total cardiac arrest inevitably followed just moments later. The farmer's fragile biological system completely failed under the brutal, emotionless reality of wild nature. Hours later, local emergency rescue units finally arrived at the quiet, rural farm. The bright sun continued to shine warmly on the perfectly calm water of the river. Humphrey the hippo was peacefully grazing on the dry grass nearby. The massive animal was completely unaffected by the violent event it had just caused. He was simply existing according to his ancient, wild programming. The empty riverbank stood as a cold, factual reminder of a deadly human error. Wild animals do not understand the concept of a loving human father. They only understand territory, physical dominance, and absolute survival. On November 13, 2008, the lush, heavily landscaped grounds of the world-famous Singapore Zoo were packed with relaxed tourists. The dense tropical air was thick with sticky moisture. The park was filled with the loud, overlapping sounds of chattering visitors and calling exotic birds. The white tiger exhibit was a primary daytime attraction. It was beautifully designed to carefully mimic a natural jungle environment. The dangerous animals were completely separated from the public walkways by a wide, water-filled defensive moat and thick concrete walls. Pacing quietly on the pristine, green grass of the central island were three fully grown, highly muscular white tigers. They were massive apex predators, carefully bred and safely displayed for public entertainment. Standing closely among the thick crowd of onlookers was 32-year-old Nourdine Ben Montong. He was a contract cleaner employed by the facility. He was wearing his standard work uniform and holding nothing more than a bright yellow plastic bucket and a flimsy wooden broom. Suddenly, Nourdine was gripped by a deeply irrational and completely fatal compulsion. For unknown psychological reasons, he subjectively believed he possessed the unique ability to simply walk right into the tiger enclosure. He thought he could safely interact with the giant cats. He operated under the profound delusion that he could manually calm the massive animals down. He thought he could magically befriend them using only his quiet voice and his simple cleaning tools. He fundamentally ignored the absolute reality of the biological food chain. The rigid safety standard of any modern zoological park is built entirely on the strict concept of forced physical isolation. Humans and tigers must never share the exact same physical space without heavy steel barriers. A tiger is an incredibly efficient, heavily armed, kinetic hunting machine. They possess extreme muscular density and sharp, retractable claws. Their powerful jaws are specifically evolved to instantly crush the cervical spine of large, escaping prey. They operate on a very strict, completely emotionless predator and prey binary system. Anything unfamiliar that suddenly enters their designated territory is immediately classified as either a direct physical threat or an active food source. Completely ignoring the frantic shouts of the nearby crowd, Nourdine deliberately climbed over the low glass visitor barrier. He dropped heavily into the deep water of the protective moat, splashing loudly. He slowly waded across the dark water barrier, tightly clutching his yellow bucket. He physically hoisted himself up onto the grassy island. He actively crossed the absolute boundary of human safety. Time seemed to artificially slow down for the dozens of horrified tourists watching from the concrete pathway above. Nourdine stood up completely straight on the wet grass. He casually waved his yellow bucket. He aggressively pointed his simple wooden broom at the three massive tigers. He likely expected the animals to retreat or act like easily startled domestic alley cats. Instead, the heavy tigers instantly stopped their relaxed pacing. Their intense predatory focus locked entirely onto the fragile, dripping human. The sudden appearance of an unprotected target inside their closed territory immediately activated their hardwired pack hunting instincts. The grim mechanics of consequence unfolded with blinding, terrifying speed. The human's naive attempt at establishing dominance was immediately met with a massive, highly coordinated kinetic attack. The lead white tiger launched its heavy body forward. The giant cat easily closed the physical distance in less than a single second. The flimsy wooden broom was completely shattered upon the initial overwhelming impact of the animal's heavy paws. Norden was violently slammed backwards onto the grass by the sheer physical weight of the apex predator. The other two tigers immediately joined the rapid assault. The human body was entirely subjected to overwhelming physical trauma. The tiger's massive jaws easily clamped down onto the vulnerable areas of the man's upper torso. This caused immediate and extreme, localized blunt force trauma. The animal's thick teeth instantly compromised the vital structural integrity of the human's major vascular pathways. The human biological system suffered a massive, instantaneous drop in critical blood pressure. Total circulatory failure occurred within a matter of seconds. The extreme physical damage made any form of medical intervention absolutely impossible. Nordine experienced a rapid, completely irreversible loss of consciousness right on the exhibit lawn. Terminal cardiac arrest followed almost instantly as his brain was totally deprived of vital oxygen. The terrified screams of the zoo visitors echoed loudly across the thick jungle canopy. Emergency park personnel eventually arrived on the scene. They desperately deployed loud noise alarms and high-pressure water hoses to force the aggressive animals back into their secure concrete holding dens. The bright yellow plastic bucket lay completely abandoned on the perfectly manicured green grass. The shattered wooden pieces of the cleaning broom were scattered near the edge of the dark water moat. The three tigers sat quietly in their secure indoor cages. They were licking their paws and acting exactly as nature intended them to act. The horrific public spectacle remained a stark forensic testament to a brutal reality. Subjective human confidence is utterly meaningless when it directly collides with the ruthless, unforgiving laws of wild predatory nature. On June 17, 2012, 30-year-old Carolina confidently walked through a heavy steel maintenance gate, completely alone and without an emergency radio. She was a highly experienced zoological expert entering the isolated timber wolf enclosure at Sweden's Kolmården Wildlife Park. She was trusting her life to a pack of animals she had raised from birth. The vast pine forests surrounding the facility were quiet, specifically designed to give the captive predators a strong sense of wild territory. Carolina was operating under a deeply ingrained, completely subjective illusion of absolute maternal control. She had personally bottle-fed these exact 8 wolves since they were tiny, blind, helpless pups. She genuinely believed she had successfully established a permanent, unbreakable position as the undisputed alpha leader of the large pack. She wanted to maintain close, intimate social contact with the animals. She fully expected a warm, playful, dog-like greeting from her furry family. The established daily norm for this highly specialized zoological program involved routine physical interaction to keep the wolves accustomed to a human presence. However, the biological reality is that a timber wolf pack is a highly volatile, constantly shifting biological machine. Their internal social hierarchy is absolutely never permanently settled. It is continuously tested, challenged, and brutally enforced through aggressive posturing and kinetic physical dominance. They simply do not view a fragile human as a permanent, magical mother figure. They operate strictly on ancient, emotionless rules of survival. If a pack member shows sudden physical weakness, or if the internal animal hierarchy shifts, the biological rules change instantly. The human is immediately reclassified from a respected pack leader to a highly isolated, vulnerable target. Carolina walked calmly and confidently into the center of the dense forest enclosure. She casually sat down on the cool dirt to invite friendly interaction. The 8 large wolves quickly approached her from the shadows of the pine trees. But the subtle psychological dynamic of the wild pack had suddenly and completely shifted. Instead of playful, happy submission, the animals began to silently and methodically circle the lone human keeper. Time seemed to artificially slow down in the quiet, isolated Swedish forest. For a few incredibly tense seconds, Carolina likely realized the large animals were no longer acting like her domestic pets. Their ears pinned back tightly against their skulls, and their heavy tails stiffened aggressively. The pack executed its hardwired hunting strategy with terrifying speed. The wolves suddenly launched a massive, synchronized kinetic pack assault. The subjective illusion of her dominant alpha status instantly evaporated into the cold air. The massive animals attacked using their hardwired, lethal swarm tactics. Multiple heavy wolves lunged at the solitary human simultaneously from different angles. Carolina was violently dragged to the ground by the overwhelming, combined physical weight of the apex predators. The brief physical struggle was completely asymmetrical and brutally short. The wolves easily targeted her exposed neck and fragile extremities. The massive jaw pressure of the top predators caused immediate, extreme localized blunt force trauma. The animal's sharp teeth instantly caused catastrophic damage to the critical blood vessels in her neck. The human body experienced a massive, instantaneous drop in critical blood pressure. Total circulatory failure occurred within a matter of mere seconds. The severe structural damage made any form of physical defense or medical survival absolutely impossible. Carolina suffered a rapid, totally irreversible loss of consciousness right on the forest floor. Terminal cardiac arrest followed almost instantly as her human brain was completely deprived of vital oxygen. The fragile human biological system was completely overwhelmed by the very animals she had lovingly nurtured. Several hours passed in total radio silence. Frantic, concerned co-workers eventually arrived at the outer perimeter fence. They found the heavy steel safety gate securely locked from the inside. The 8 wolves were pacing aggressively around the center of the large enclosure, fiercely guarding their conquered territory. Carolina's lifeless body lay quietly in the disturbed dirt. Her heavy metal keyring was abandoned in the tall grass nearby. The deeply tragic scene stood as a cold, entirely factual reminder of a deadly zoological error. A human can bottle feed a wild apex predator, but they can never permanently erase its ancient, ruthless biological programming. On September 23, 1982, a simple plastic bag filled with random pieces of food became the catalyst for a brutal nighttime tragedy. The historic Central Park Zoo in New York City was securely locked, its heavy iron bars acting as a vital shield between the sleeping metropolis and nature's deadliest hunters. Deep inside the aging facility, the massive polar bear enclosure sat in total, undisturbed darkness. The old Victorian-era exhibit was a harsh, unforgiving landscape of thick iron bars, solid concrete rock formations, and a deep pool of cold, stagnant water. Resting quietly inside this fortress were the largest, most powerful land-based apex predators on the entire planet. 29-year-old Ronald approached the heavy perimeter fences in the dead of the night. He was completely alone, tightly holding a simple plastic bag filled with random pieces of food. Ronald was heavily driven by a massive, completely delusional, psychological impulse. He subjectively believed he possessed a magical, innate ability to instantly tame deadly wild beasts. He completely ignored the heavy iron bars and the highly visible warning signs. He genuinely thought he could simply offer the giant polar bears a late-night snack, bypass their aggressive instincts, and gently pet their thick white fur. He viewed the massive, relentless Arctic hunters not as lethal, finely tuned killing machines, but merely as large, misunderstood teddy bears patiently waiting for human affection. The absolute basic safety norm of this city zoo was built entirely on impenetrable physical fortification. Visitors must stay safely behind heavy steel fencing, and the animals must remain securely locked inside their concrete cells. The biological reality is that polar bears are incredibly aggressive, highly efficient kinetic engines specifically evolved to hunt in the harshest, most unforgiving environments on Earth. They are one of the very few animal species on the globe that actively and instinctively view humans as a direct, natural food source. They absolutely do not possess any genetic capability to understand or appreciate a friendly human gesture. Any biological target that suddenly enters their locked territory is immediately classified as active prey. Ignoring all common sense and logic, Ronald physically scaled the outer iron perimeter fence. He dropped heavily down into the dark, completely enclosed space of the bear habitat, his shoes slapping loudly against the stone. Time seemed to artificially slow down in the cold New York night. Ronald stood proudly and confidently on the hard concrete floor. He held out his crinkling plastic bag of food, exactly like a park visitor feeding a stray city pigeon. He likely expected the massive white giants to amble over lazily and gently take the food right from his bare hand. Instead, the sudden noise and unexpected movement instantly awakened the deadly predators. A massive 1,000-pound polar bear silently and rapidly rose from the dark shadows. The sheer physical scale of the towering animal completely dwarfed the fragile human intruder. The wild bear did not care at all about the plastic bag or the naive offer of spiritual friendship. The predatory response was immediate and merciless. The massive apex predator launched a sudden, overwhelmingly violent kinetic strike. The bear rapidly swiped its enormous, heavily clawed paw with devastating speed and extreme physical force. Ronald was instantly slammed violently against the hard, unforgiving concrete walls of the enclosure. The brutal physical encounter was completely asymmetrical and blindingly fast. The massive bear easily used its incredible body weight and powerful jaws to inflict catastrophic structural damage. The human suffered extreme, highly localized, blunt force trauma to his head and upper torso. The animal's immense physical bite force easily compromised vital internal organs and major vascular systems. The human body experienced an immediate, massive loss of critical blood pressure. His heart and vital organs quickly failed under the sheer physical trauma. Ronald suffered a rapid, deeply painful, and completely irreversible loss of consciousness right on the cold concrete floor. Terminal cardiac arrest inevitably followed just a few short moments later, as his biological systems completely collapsed under the overwhelming physical power of the true Arctic predator. Morning light eventually broke over the incredibly busy, noisy metropolis. Panicked zoo officials arrived early to begin their daily feeding and cleaning routines. They quickly discovered a deeply tragic and fatal scene inside the locked enclosure. The massive polar bear was quietly and rhythmically pacing back and forth, entirely unbothered by the extreme violence of the previous night. The torn plastic food bag was completely abandoned on the wet, stained floor, its contents scattered uselessly near the heavy iron bars. The horrific incident remained a stark, perfectly forensic testament to a completely fatal human miscalculation. The cold, objective reality of the wild food chain absolutely does not care about our subjective, naive beliefs. When human delusion intentionally steps inside a locked predator cage, it is instantly and violently destroyed by the ancient, emotionless laws of predatory nature. Families often sue zoos for millions after these tragedies, claiming the walls weren't high enough to stop their relatives from climbing them. At what point does personal stupidity stop being a corporate liability? Drop your argument in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you want more uncompromising documentaries on fatal human errors.